Okay, today I'm going to change the brake shoes on my 350 Bullet Trials. There's a few differences on my bike compared to a standard Bullet. So I've done a cable brake conversion on mine. So your bike will not have this metal piece here, and it will have a control rod running from there back up to the main brake lever. I've also fitted a Crusader Sport brake plate. This is a standard Indian Bullet brake plate. As you can see, this one took some damage. It's quite thin, flimsy, there's not much bracing on there, and I had a couple of incidents and I just thought, well, let's replace it with something a lot more meaty. But to all intents and purposes, these are the same piece. There is some adjustment with spacers and things to make this fit, but it's essentially the same bit, and the procedure is the same. So what we're going to do first is take the back wheel out. So I'm going to remove my cotter pin, and then we are going to need a 24mm socket. Okay, 24mm socket, and that undoes the main rear wheel nut. What I like to do with this is to keep the threads in good condition, so I'm not striking the end of it. Even though I'm using a dead blow hammer, I leave the nut on and we just drive this axle out. The rear brake and sprocket assembly are held on separately to the rear wheel, so you can take the rear wheel in and out without disturbing the brakes or the chain tension. But we are going to be removing everything this time, so I'll take that nut all the way off. And we'll just tap the axle most of the way through. What I'll do is move you now, so you can see what I'm doing on the other side. There are some slight differences on this side too. The main one being I have moved the speedo drive to this side of the bike, just because I've got a different front wheel fitted. So on a standard Bullet this won't be there, but all the rest of it is the same. So I find if you just get a screwdriver or similar in that hole, we can pull, probably right in your way, we can pull that axle all the way out, and we've got the snail cam on it. I find the axle is quite a good way to get this spacer out. We can wiggle that out. So we have the spacer there, and my spacer's been modified so that I can fit the speedo cable in, so yours won't have this area ground away. It'll just be a plain spacer. So the speedo drive comes off. And you will have a small top hat spacer inside there, bearing against the inside race of the bearing instead of a speedo drive. So from this point, the rear wheel just needs to be pushed over to one side. This detaches it from the push drive and it rolls out. Again, on a standard Bullet, you may need to, if I move you back a bit, the wheel will roll out from here. On a standard Bullet, you may need to detach the rear subframe and lift it up in order to get the wheel out. Because this is a trials bike, I have a high mud guard. You should be able to see there, we've still got the rear sprocket and brake drum attached, You can see the push drive vanes there, which engage with the push drive rubbers on the wheel. Okay, so our next step is we want to get the rear brake drum and sprocket off the bike so that I can get at the brake shoes. So that's the rear sprocket and drum. My sprocket's bolted on, it's a larger sprocket, most of them are cast in one piece, but again, same procedure. For this we will need a 32mm socket, no, a 30mm socket to go on this stub axle nut. So we're going to remove the stub axle nut. It needs a 30mm socket, and that just undoes. Okay, stub axle nuts off. I'm going to take the snail cam off. My one's made slightly thinner than a normal one, which is to accommodate this crusader brake plate. And we need to undo this anti-rotation nut here. I believe this is an imperial size. I think this is probably should use a Whitworth spanner, but an 18mm spanner fits it perfectly well. So remove this all the way. You would just need to loosen it if you were adjusting chain tension. Take that off, take the washer off. This piece here is extra because of my my conversion. So there's nothing really holding the rear brake and sprocket assembly on now, other than a bit of friction. So I'll just give that a tap. So I'll move that out the way, and what we should now be able to do is disassemble this part. It's often easier to take it all the way off. You may find you need to remove the brake control rod in order to do this. So we've got the sprocket and drum that rotate on the brake plate, and there's a central pin which holds it all together, so they should just come apart. So we now have brake drum and sprocket. It's got the central pin which runs on the bearing, and a spacer. The spacer is the other part I had to modify to fit that brake plate. So now we can see our brake plate. It's a single leading drum brake, so the cam just moves the brake shoes out. These brake shoes appear to have no bite whatsoever. I think they're very old, and the compound's gone bad. I find usually I can just lift one up and they disengage from the brake plate. It's worth giving this area clean. This has been done quite recently, believe it or not, so it's not as dirty as it could be. This pin may need greasing. This is very free to move. There's not much play on it, so I'm happy with that. So I will get my new brake shoes. So what I have here is a set of Indian Home Market brake shoes, which have been relined with a higher friction, better quality British lining material. So we try to avoid getting oily fingerprints on the shoes themselves. I will retrieve the springs off my old set. So this is probably one of the fiddlier parts of the job. I'm going to put my springs on the brake shoes, you'll notice they have a rounded area and a flattened area, and you will notice that there are ridges on these shoes which correspond with ridges on this pivot pin. Some models don't have those, so you need to make sure you've got the correct shoes for your model. I find hooking both of these in at the same time, keeping them there and getting it on the drum, one of the hardest parts. But what we're going to do, if I just angle you down slightly, is with that cam more or less in a central position, I'm going to put the flats on the cam and the rounds on it, and you can see this is what keeps happening, is the springs keep coming unhooked. Right, we've got them. So with the brake shoes together, I place them roughly in place and then push them apart. Now I haven't quite got that one engaged. Don't stick your fingers in there because it's under quite a lot of spring tension, but there we go. So that's them hooked in now. That's my new brake shoes fitted. Right, next part of the job will be to reassemble everything. So what's probably easiest is if I put the sprocket assembly back. No, that won't work. Having the chain in one piece can make life tricky, but I think what we want to do here is engage the new shoes into the brake drum and make sure that the shaft is pushed all the way through. Now I'm going to engage the whole assembly back with the chain. Move you up a bit. This is made slightly more awkward on mine due to the presence of a chain tensioner. So we've got that, and you'll notice that on this shaft there are two flats which need to slide into this fork end, and at the same time we need the anti-rotation pin to engage with its slot. So this can take a little bit of fiddling, but we've got away with it very quickly this time. You'll also notice my brakes return spring is slightly non-standard. It does not have a captive spring, this type of brake plate. So as long as I have it roughly in the right place on a standard bullet, that's not an issue. What I need to do now is, which I put in the wrong place, pardon me, I'm just going to put the snail cam back on. It could go one of either ways. If you were smart, you left it the other one on the axle, which will remind you which way round it goes. So I want it in this orientation. It doesn't matter the tension at the moment, we can set that later as long as we have it on. I'm going to put the nut and washer back on the anti-rotation bolt, which will stop everything coming off again, just to hold it there for just now. Alright, I see this spring can be a bit of a nuisance, but it's not a nuisance if you have a standard bullet. Okay, snail cam on. except for I've put it on the wrong way round, I think. There we are. And if we can get this nut started, so get this nut started, and then I can hold it out of the way with a screwdriver while I tighten the nut. A 30mm socket again, and once this is tightened down, everything will sort of come into alignment. And so you won't have the annoyance of that spring being in your way. Right, that's got that almost done. Spring's kind of out of place, but this is an old screwdriver specifically for this kind of job. It should work its way up into there. We can sort that afterwards. Okay, we've got that mostly tightened down. We'll tighten our anti-rotation nut. So we're not tightening them fully down, just kind of finger tight, because we're going to want to adjust the chain tension once we've refitted the wheel. So we lift the wheel back into place. You can see these quick detach wheels are quite helpful, and what I need to do is lift that up and onto the vanes of the push drive. That can take a little bit of wiggling, but that's it, more or less resting in place. I'm just going to have a slight fiddle here to fit the speedo drive, which, as I say, you won't need to do. So now we need to refit the wheel spacer and the wheel spindle. Again, mine is unnecessarily tricky to fit because of this speedo drive, but we can usually get it in there. I'm probably in your way. That's quite close. That's even closer. So you can see now we've got the spacer in, and we can slide the spindle into the spacer and then wiggle the wheel about until we get into the middle. So that's in, and now I can tap that all the way through. Okay, back to the start. So we need to set the chain tension, which is done by manoeuvring the wheel backwards and setting the snail cams to an equal position. You will find on some bikes just because the snail cams are on the same notch doesn't mean the wheel's aligned. So you may want to check your wheel alignment with a straight edge. So I'm going to try and move this back. I happen to know that my chain adjustment is at the extreme far end of the range of movement of the snail cam, because of my oddball chain length and tensioning. Come on. So much so, in fact, I think I'm going to have to take that nut off and place the snail cam manually. There we are, just on that last notch. And I've put my nut down. Okay, there will be a brief interlude while I fiddle with this spring, which, as I say, okay, there we are. I've got my spring in position now, as I say, on a standard bullet. If we look at that brake plate, the spring is actually captive on the brake plate. The end of the spring is engaged on one of these two nuts, and it doesn't go anywhere. But on this one, it's just a sort of free fall spring. So yeah, we've set our snail cams into the same position on both sides of the bike. Yes, the wheel's fully home against the snail cams, so that's the wheel in with the chain tensioned. What I now need to do is tighten down these two nuts, and it's best to do that whilst holding the brake on. So you would adjust your brake control rod so that the brake's working at that point, and then tighten down these nuts with the brake held on. That stops the brake plate wobbling out of position. It keeps it lined up with the brake shoes rather than lined up with the wheel, which is not necessarily where you want it to be. Be careful with this, it's got quite a fine thread on it. Don't over tighten it. It needs to be tight enough, but not too tight. In a standard bullet, there will be a spacer washer between the swinging arm and the brake plate. It's sometimes a washer, actually, sometimes a nut, like on this one. This one has it built into the casting. So we've got those tight. Is that tight enough? I'll call that tight enough. This one can afford to be quite tight. And this is an absolutely appropriate time to check if your brake's functioning, which I can already tell this brake is better than it was before. So now I just need to replace the castellated wheel nut. Again, that was a 24mm socket. That's more or less tight enough, and then you need to find where you put your cotter pin down, which may take me a moment. I'm sure it'll turn up. I've got a replacement one here anyway, so put a cotter pin in, and that's the rear brake shoes changed. So chains tensioned, wheels free to turn, brakes working. All good.